Intro 002 $310 million. That's how much fake sales Luckin Coffee fabricated to convince investors its explosive growth was real. In less than 3 years, the company went from unknown startup to a $12 billion public company on Nasdaq. Thousands of stores, millions of customers, a direct challenger to Starbucks in China. But the most surprising part of this story isn't just the fraud. It's how investigators eventually proved it. They didn't start with accounting records. They started by counting coffee customers. Hundreds of stores, thousands of receipts. But we'll come back to that. This is the collapse of Luckin Coffee. The promise. Oko 45. Luckin Coffee launched in China in 2017. The idea looked brilliant. Instead of traditional coffee shops with seating and long lines, Luckin built a digital-first model. Customers ordered through a mobile app. Stores were small. Most locations were pickup only. No waiting, no sitting, just fast coffee. This allowed Luckin to open stores incredibly quickly. Within 2 years, the company expanded to thousands of locations across China. In fact, Luckin soon had more stores in China than Starbucks. Investors loved the story. A technology-driven coffee chain, a massive Chinese consumer market, a company scaling faster than anyone expected. The IPO, 150. In 2019, Luckin Coffee went public on the Nasdaq. The company raised hundreds of millions of dollars from global investors. At its peak, Luckin Coffee reached a valuation of over $12 billion. Analysts praised its aggressive expansion strategy. Growth numbers looked incredible. Revenue appeared to be rising rapidly every quarter. On paper, Luckin looked unstoppable. But some investors started asking a basic question. If Luckin Coffee was selling drinks at heavy discounts and opening thousands of new stores, how could the company also be reporting massive revenue growth? Something didn't make sense. The red flags. 3 cause. Luckin used aggressive promotions to attract customers. Huge discounts. Free coffee coupons. 2 drinks for the price of 1. Sometimes even free drinks for new users. The goal was simple. Capture market share as fast as possible. But these promotions raised an important question. If the company was losing money on each drink, how could revenue still be growing so fast? Some analysts believed the growth story anyway. China's coffee market was huge. Luckin was expanding everywhere. The narrative felt believable. But behind the scenes, something much bigger was happening. The investigation. 420. In early 2020, a research group released a detailed report. The report accused Luckin Coffee of fabricating large portions of its revenue. Not small accounting errors, massive fake transactions. But how could investigators prove that? This is where the story becomes unusual. Researchers sent people to hundreds of Luckin stores across China. They watched customer traffic. They counted how many people actually bought coffee. They collected receipts. They recorded purchase times. Then they compared those real-world observations to the company's reported sales. The numbers didn't match. Not even close. The fraud mechanism. 540. Soon the truth began to emerge. Luckin Coffee had been fabricating revenue. Employees created fake transactions inside the company's systems. These transactions were often linked to coupons and vouchers. On paper, it looked like customers were buying drinks. In reality, many of those purchases never happened. Some of the fabricated sales were routed through related companies. This made the transactions appear legitimate in accounting records. Quarterly revenue appeared to grow rapidly. Investors saw strong numbers. But the underlying sales activity simply didn't exist. By the time the fraud was uncovered, Luckin had inflated revenue by more than $310 million. The collapse. 7OI. Once the investigation gained attention, the company could no longer maintain the story. Luckin Coffee admitted that senior executives had fabricated hundreds of millions of dollars in sales. The market reacted immediately. The stock price collapsed. In a matter of weeks, Luckin Coffee lost more than 80% of its value. Nasdaq eventually delisted the company. What had been one of the fastest-growing startups in China became one of the fastest corporate collapses. The psychology of the collapse, 810. But the deeper question is this: how did so many investors believe the numbers? The answer is growth. Hypergrowth stories are extremely powerful in financial markets. When a company appears to be expanding rapidly, skepticism often fades. Investors see new stores. They see rising revenue. They see a massive potential market. And they assume the story must be real. Luckin Coffee understood this dynamic very well. The faster the company expanded physically, the more believable the financial story became. Aftermath. 9/10. Luckin Coffee removed its CEO and several senior executives. The company paid hundreds of millions of dollars in fines. For many investors, billions in market value disappeared. But in an unusual twist, Luckin Coffee itself did not completely disappear. The company restructured. Stores continued operating in China. Customers kept buying coffee. But its reputation with global investors was permanently damaged. Lessons. 950. Luckin Coffee teaches 3 critical lessons. First, hypergrowth stories deserve the most scrutiny. Second, if a company is losing money on every sale, reported revenue growth should be questioned. And third, numbers alone are not proof. Revenue can be fabricated. Transactions can be invented. But reality eventually catches up. And when it does, the collapse is usually very fast. Outro. 1040. Luckin Coffee promised to become the Starbucks of China. Instead, it became a case study in fabricated growth. $310 million in fake sales. A $12 billion illusion. And one of the most dramatic corporate frauds of the modern market. Luckin Coffee. $310 million fraud intro. Zero also. $310 million. That's how much fake sales Luckin Coffee fabricated to convince the world it was China's next Starbucks. In less than 3 years, the company went from startup to a $12 billion valuation to one of the fastest corporate collapses in modern market history. But the real story isn't just the fraud. It's how an entire system, investors, analysts, and Wall Street, believed numbers that were completely invented. This is the collapse of Luckin Coffee. The promise. 020. Luckin Coffee launched in China in 2017. Their idea was simple: build a technology-driven coffee chain that could beat Starbucks at speed and convenience. Customers ordered through an app. Stores were small. No seating, no waiting, just pick up and go. Investors loved it. The company expanded at an unbelievable pace. In just 2 years, Luckin opened more stores in China than Starbucks. And in 2019, the company went public on the Nasdaq. Valuation, over $12 billion. But behind the scenes, the growth story wasn't real. The red flag, 120, Luckin Coffee, claimed explosive revenue growth. Quarter after quarter, sales appeared to be skyrocketing. Analysts praised the company's aggressive expansion strategy. The narrative was simple: China had hundreds of millions of potential coffee drinkers. Luckin was capturing the market faster than anyone expected. But some investors started asking a basic question: how could a company giving away massive discounts, selling coffee at a loss, and opening thousands of stores also report massive revenue growth? Something didn't add up. The investigation. 220. In early 2020, a research group released a detailed report. The report accused Luckin Coffee of fabricating sales. Not small errors, not accounting mistakes, massive fake transactions. To test the numbers, investigators sent people to hundreds of Luckin stores. They counted customers, tracked receipts, recorded actual purchases. Then they compared that data to what the company reported. The conclusion was shocking. Sales numbers were inflated dramatically. The fraud mechanism, 320. Here's how the fraud worked. Luckin Coffee employees created fake transactions. Instead of real customers buying coffee, the company recorded sales internally. They issued fabricated coupons and vouchers. These vouchers were used to simulate purchases. On paper, the company appeared to be selling huge volumes of coffee. In reality, many of those transactions never happened. By the time the fraud was uncovered, Luckin had inflated revenue by more than $310 million. The collapse, 420. Once the investigation gained attention, the company could no longer maintain the story. Luckin Coffee admitted the truth. Senior executives had fabricated hundreds of millions of dollars in sales. The market reacted instantly. The stock collapsed. In just weeks, Luckin Coffee lost more than 80% of its value. Nasdaq eventually delisted the company. What had been one of the fastest-growing startups in China became one of the fastest corporate implosions. The psychology of the collapse, 530. But the most interesting question is this: how did so many people believe the numbers? The answer is growth. Investors desperately want to believe in explosive growth stories. Luckin Coffee fit the narrative perfectly. A massive market, a technology-driven model, a challenger to Starbucks. When a company grows fast enough, skepticism often disappears. Analysts assume success. Investors assume scale, and small warning signs get ignored until the numbers finally break. The aftermath, 640. Luckin Coffee's CEO and several executives were removed. The company paid hundreds of millions in fines. For many investors, billions of dollars in market value disappeared. But the brand itself didn't completely vanish. In an unusual twist, Luckin Coffee eventually restructured and continued operating in China. Stores remained open. Customers kept buying coffee. But the company's reputation, especially with global investors, was permanently damaged. Executive Lessons, 740. Luckin Coffee teaches 3 critical lessons. First, hypergrowth stories deserve the most scrutiny. Second, if a business model loses money on every sale, reported growth should be questioned. And third, numbers alone are not proof. Revenue can be fabricated. Transactions can be invented. But reality eventually catches up. And when it does, the collapse is usually very fast. Outro, 830. Luckin Coffee promised to build the Starbucks of China. Instead, it became a case study in fabricated growth. $310 million in fake sales, a $12 billion illusion, and one of the most dramatic corporate frauds of the modern market.